Good morning and thank you for joining. We'll be starting the session in just a few moments. We'll wait for a few more attendees to join. Let's start the session. Good morning again and thank you for your patience. Welcome to the session AWS Migrations Deep Dive. I am Suvarna Jadhav working with Cloud.in as a strategic partnership and alliance manager. Before starting the session, I would like to mention few points. All attendees are muted by default and cannot be unmuted during a session. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. If in case you have questions in between the session, please raise your hand to grab speaker's attention or ask questions through the questions section. We are honored to have Mr. Madhusudan Karnati sir as a speaker for this session today. Sir is a cloud enterprise architect and AWS certification trainer. He has 26 plus years of experience in traditional and cloud infrastructure technologies and services, with technical expertise in consulting, pre-sales, design, implementation, operations, and support function. He has experience in architecture, implementing and transitioning enterprise cloud infrastructure solutions using private, public, and hybrid cloud models. He has additionally conducted more than 2,000 hours of trainings to public and private corporates, delivering impactful training backed by extensive experience in architecting, implementation, and operations management. Welcome, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Suvarna, for that introduction. And good morning and welcome you all to this webinar. Yeah. I hope over this weekend you will definitely gain a lot in this 1 hour of session. Okay. And as Suvarna mentioned, if you have any questions, type in the chat window, okay, or raise your hand and we'll take up the question. And if these are relevant to whatever that has been covered till that slide, we'll take it up immediately. But if your question is sometime into the future or is not relevant to this topic, if you have time, we will discuss towards the end. Okay. Okay. So before we go further, I'd like to know from you If you have any experience on AWS, type yes in the chat window. I would like to really understand the audience so that I can face my presentation accordingly. Type yes if you already have experience on AWS. I
As we
don't
are
see.
waiting for your response, please type in yes in chat if you have experience.
So there are 18 people. I don't see a single yes. Does it mean that none of you have any experience on AWS? Okay, type no if you don't have any experience on AWS. Type no if you don't have any experience in AWS. Am I audible to you all? I'm not seeing any response from you. Am I audible? Suvarna, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I'm able to hear you.
But I don't see any response from anybody. Can somebody confirm if they're able to hear me? Type yes if you're able to hear me.
Yes, sir, they are raising the hand. I can see few people have raised the hand.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, as the name indicates, right, uh, migration means what? It is basically moving from one place to another place. And when you talk about AWS migration, we are talking about moving your applications and the infrastructure resources into AWS cloud. And as you all know, or I expect that you would be knowing that AWS is a public cloud service provider, right? And when you say public cloud service provider, you are sharing the underlying infrastructure resources on which the applications are deployed by users from different clients, or the different organizations or clients share the underlying resources of AWS to deploy their workloads. Okay. Now, how the data is secured, how those applications are separated from one another, we are not going to talk about that in this AWS migration. We assume that you all know that, and if you do not know, then I suggest you to go through some course on AWS. Okay. So in this session today, we are going to cover these topics. Okay. So we will cover what is the approach for migration. So which basically includes the steps, the high level steps that are performed in a phased manner to migrate the workloads from your on-premises into AWS. And whenever you perform migration, right, from one data center to another data center, from one data center to cloud or cloud to another cloud, right, whenever you move from one place to another place, one source to destination, there are number of tools that are used. And the tools that you use depends on the phase of migration. So in the migration approach, we are going to talk about different phases, and we'll try to understand the different tools that are used in each of those phases. And as you see below, the AWS Migration Hub, Application Discovery Service, Database Migration Service, Application Migration Service, Data Sync, and Snow Family, these are all the tools that AWS provides you to migrate from on-premise into AWS. In fact, there are some tools here which can be used for migrating from cloud, that is from AWS, into on-premise also. Okay, we'll see what those tools and how they help us to do that. Okay, now whenever we say talk about migration, what is that you are migrating from on-premise into AWS? Okay, we will talk about that. So what is that we are going to migrate, and how these tools will help you to migrate those components into AWS. So before we go further, quick, I know Suvarna has given an introduction. Now here is a quick introduction to my profile. Uh, I have worked on multiple industry verticals. I've worked in various phases of project lifecycle, from the conception to the time to the design, build, implement, and then support. Okay, so I've seen the entire life cycle of project implementation. I have the experience of working in hybrid cloud environment. as well. Then I've done a number of data center migration projects, and I come here with a lot of experience in migration space. Okay, and I am sure that this session is going to help you in at least getting a high level understanding of migration in case you have not been there. If you already know migration and worked on that, you will definitely get some more deep insight into that. Okay. Worked on number of Fortune 500 companies, and with respect to AWS, I have more than 15 years of experience in the AWS space itself. Okay, and here are my coordinates in case if you have any questions and you want to contact me post this webinar. Feel free to write to this email ID, or you can WhatsApp on the number that is given there. And you can also connect me on the LinkedIn. Okay, now here is the migration approach. Now, whatever the steps that you take to migrate the workloads from on-premise into AWS, now you will see these steps are being performed. Now, here I am showing them as 5 different phases. Somebody may show it as 3 different phases, but end of the day, these steps have to be performed. Okay. Now, what is that first thing that you need to do is that if you want to migrate, you really need to know what is that you want to migrate, right? So you should have the complete list of applications that you want to migrate, and now whenever you talk about an application, it should be running on some base infrastructure. You should be consuming some server, network, storage, right? So you need to know the infrastructure on which these applications are running. So must capture the application inventory and infrastructure inventory. And when we talk about migrating an application, end of the day, it is the infrastructure that you need to know that houses that application, so that if when you want to migrate that application, end of the day, it is the infrastructure that you migrate. So you need to have that mapping. So if you app to infra mapping is another thing that you do as part of discovery process. You also capture the resource utilization information and some more additional information. Now we are not getting into all that details, but at a high level, these are the details that you capture. Now, why do you need resource utilization? Probably you want to check how these applications are consuming those resources. It is possible that some of these resources may be overutilized or underutilized, and you can adjust the size of infrastructure in your target environment when you migrate it. Okay. And after that, you do the assessment of the infrastructure, assessment of the environment to see if there are any issues. Now, why you need to understand issues is basically it may so happen that you migrate an application, and if you do not know that there was an issue in the application prior migration, there is every possibility that the client might put on your head saying that this was working prior but not working now post migration. So you need to understand the issues not only from that aspect, but also it provides you an opportunity to fix some of the issues as part of migration. For example, you are running some application on, say, an outdated operating system, let's say Windows 2008. Windows 2008 today is not supported. Now, if you migrate, as part of migration, if you're again using Windows 2008 as a target, then you are not solving that problem. But as part of migration, you have an opportunity to migrate to a supported operating system, maybe 2019 or 22, provided the application supports that operating system. So you need to understand the issues and see if there are anything that can be addressed as part of a migration. Are there any specific standards and compliance that organization needs to adhere? You need to know that. For example, if you are working for a financial or an insurance sector and the organization need to be HIPAA compliant, applications need to be HIPAA compliant, then AWS gives you a number of services that are HIPAA compliant. So you choose the services that are HIPAA compliant. So you need to understand the standards and compliance and any future requirements. What today they may be running something, and right, maybe they're serving 1,000 users. 3 years down the line, they may have 5,000 users. So you need to understand that so that you can architect your solution so that it can meet your future requirements. And whenever you talk about migration, there are always risks involved. You need to understand those risks and have a clear risk mitigation, perform the risk assessment and come out with the risk mitigation plan. Okay, or sometimes you may have to accept the risk, sometimes you have a chance to mitigate the risk. Okay, So you perform that risk assessment, and then finally you do the analysis. What is that analysis? Let's say you want to migrate one application into AWS. It is possible that application might have downstream applications on which this application depends. And there might be upstream applications, okay, which depend on this application. So if you're migrating an application from your environment into AWS, you need to understand the dependency. If you don't understand the dependency, now what will happen? Let's say you migrate an application from your on-premise into AWS. Now there are downstream applications. Now this application will not work because there are other depending applications which are sitting in the on-premise. Okay. And similarly, if you have upstream applications, then those upstream applications will not work because you have this application which is migrated to AWS. And if you're not properly taken care of connectivity and communication between the applications, then all these depending and dependent applications will fail. So you need to understand that dependency. And what the best practice why we understand that dependency is that we try to group all those depending applications upstream and downstreams, okay, into one group, and then move all these applications together into AWS so that there is a proper communication between these applications. Okay, so we create bundles of the depending applications, and then we create a plan on when we want to migrate each of those applications. Now, having done this bundling, the next thing is you have to define the migration strategy. There will be multiple ways in which you can migrate your workloads. Maybe you can, one option is you may use a tool and then migrate it automatically to the other side, and your application is online while you do the migration. The second option is maybe you build the application right from scratch in the cloud and then migrate the data, and on one fine day you cut over. So there are different ways you can do that. You need to, and you define the strategy depending upon the business requirements, the risk involved, compatibility of the tool, right? So capability of the tool. You look at all that aspects and then define the migration strategy. And one of the outcome of migration strategy would be your migration tools. What tools are you going to use in each of these different phases? What would you use in discovery phase, assessment phase, analyze, and plan phase? So your tools get finalized here. And once it is done, there you have to create a plan, lay out your plan, which, and on the plan you specify the timelines and the bundles that you're going to migrate as per those timelines. And you also need to have communication plan. There are so many stakeholders involved in an organization. It could be an end user, could be a business team, it could be a support team, network team, security team. All these teams need to be engaged, because if some problem happens anywhere in the migration, they are available immediately. So you need to have proper communication plan in place. And so, for example, as part of the migration, if your application is not available for a certain period of time, it is essential that the business users are kept informed of it. Otherwise, it leads to a bad experience. And finally, create the runbooks. Runbooks are nothing but the detailed step-by-step procedures that the migration team needs to follow to ensure, follow to migrate these workloads into AWS. And finally, you execute the migration steps, which is part of the migrate. Okay. Any questions until now? Any questions, Suvarna, from anyone?
No, sir, there is no question.
Okay, tools. Now, there are different tools that are used in different phases of migration, and what you see here are the set of tools that AWS provides to as part of that can be used during the migration. Now, so these tools are used in different phases. For example, if you see application discovery service is used in discovery phase. Server migration is used in the migration phase. Database migration is used in the database migration phase. And migration hub is the one which is used across the entire phases. Okay. We'll try to understand what each of these tools do. Okay, very important thing that you need to know from this diagram is whenever we talk about migration, what is it that you're migrating? If you take any application, what does it have? It will have web app DB, right? You take any application, standard application, it will have three components. So you need to migrate this web component, app component, database component. In addition, what is that you need to migrate? There will be data associated with the application. You need to migrate this data as well. Now, if you see here, where the database is migrated using the database migration services. Okay. Now, the web and application are migrated using your application server migration services. Okay. Discovery is used to get the inventory of your infrastructure and applications. Okay. And as part of discovery, it also helps you to discover the relationship between the applications. Okay. And for migrating the data sync is used for migrating the data. In addition, we'll also talk about one more service called AWS Move Services, which is also used for migrating the data. We'll cover that as well. Okay. Well, important thing is for the migration to happen, your on-premise data center and AWS should be connected to each other. Okay. Either by a direct connect or through the VPN connectivity. Okay, what is Migration Hub? Now, this is a place which holds the inventory. Whatever application discovery service discovers, all that is stored in a central place called Migration Hub. This is what holds the inventory of the applications and resources. Okay, and when you are migrating your applications, you will be migrating in phases, right? For example, you may first migrate database, then you migrate your application server, web server. And each of the servers could be in different phases. One of these could be in the discovery phase, one could be in the plan assessment phase, right? So there could be in different phases. And one way to know the status of these components is get into the each of those tools that are used in different phases. For example, if you go back, right? Now the application could be in, some could be database migration phase. If you want to know the status of database migration, you need to go into the console of database migration service. Similarly, if you want to know the status of your application, you have to go here. And if you want to know the status of data, so you need to go into 3 different tools to understand the status of migration of a particular application. But when you know that a particular application has all the 3 components, database, web, and also data, if you want to get a single dashboard view of the status, then Migration Hub is the one that provides you that single pane view of the status. Okay, so AWS migration helps you in that, and it is helps you in all phases of migration. Now, discovery service. In your environment, you might have the virtual machines or physical machines. Again, you could have the virtual machines running on VMware or Hyper-V. You need to, your application discovery service needs to discover that. Okay, and for that, it follows 2 approaches, either the agentless discovery or agent-based discovery. Now, agentless discovery are mainly used for discovering the VMs on VMware. Okay, discovering the VMware. And here we install a OVF file in the vCenter, and that we using that OVF file, you launch an appliance in the vCenter, and it will help you to capture all the information about all the VMs that are managed by that particular vCenter. However, the agentless discovery does not work with Hyper-V. Okay, so you need to use the agent-based discovery. You have to install agent on each of the VMs that are running on top of Microsoft Hyper-V. Similarly, the physical servers cannot be discovered by the agentless discovery mechanism. You need to install the agent-based discovery. Okay, so overall, you use both these mechanisms, agent-based and agentless discovery methods, to discover the inventory. Now, when you run using this, right, you capture the information, but the information captured by agent-based is always more than the information captured by agentless. That is always the case, because when you install an agent on a server, you have access to the more detailed level or more detailed insight into the server configuration and the server performance. But agent-based discovery will not have access into the operating system to get all those details. Okay, so if you are using an agentless discovery, you will get the static configuration information, whatever you're seeing in the below box. So that is your static configuration. But if you're using an agent-based discovery, you get the access to static config data, which is this data, plus you get the time series performance data, network input, output, and running process. What are the processes that are running on the specific server? What are the various services running on that server? So you get the information about those processes and services running on those systems, okay, by using the agent-based discovery service. Now, it also contains the network configuration information, which will help you in defining the dependencies between the different applications. Okay, so the network configuration information is very useful information that you get from the agent-based discovery, which helps in identifying the dependency between the applications. And time series performance data is your time based on the time, right? If you take this as a time, you get the CPU utilization, right? You get this time-based information. So you get a more detailed view about the performance of the data. Yeah, as against the VM utilization, which basically includes your average, maximum, or minimum utilization data, but you will not get the level of detail that you get using the time series performance data. So each has its own pros and cons, but the downside of using agent-based discovery is that if you have to use agent-based discovery, you must install these agents on those servers, which means you will need an administrative privilege to access those servers. Okay, and there is an additional effort in the sense that you need to go to each server, log in, and then install those agents. You might have some tools in your organization using which you can push the agents, but at the minimum, you should have the admin privilege on the servers to do that. Okay, and some of the clients may not be willing to give admin privileges for you. So in which case you don't have option but to use an agentless discovery. Okay. Now here is a quick chart that helps you to understand the differences between this. So agent-based discovery as discovery agent can be used on any of the server, but agentless discovery, which is discovery connector, you can use only with the VMware machines. It cannot be used for the physical servers. It cannot be used for other servers. And when you're using the discovery connector, you deploy it on the vCenter. And you get only static configuration data and VM utilization metrics when you are using discovery connector, not with the agent. Okay, but agent you get the other three pieces of information: the network configuration, running processes, and time series performance information. Okay, so as I said, now whatever the data that is discovered from the application discovery service, that is integrated with AWS Migration Hub. So your inventory will be sitting inside the AWS Migration Hub. Okay, so all this data is whatever is discovered is stored in the Migration Hub. Now this application discovery service allows integration with other APN partners so that the partners can bring in their tools, and using those tools, you can analyze the data that is captured by your application discovery service. Okay. Okay. Now that you have discovered the inventory, the next step is to migrate your workloads. The first one is your database migration. Now, as the name indicates, this is a service that is used to migrate your databases into AWS. Okay, so what does it do? It basically allows you to migrate from your data center into AWS. Now, there are different database services that are available, like you have Aurora, you have RDS service, you have Redshift. Now, Redshift is also put under the database category. No doubt this is a data warehouse tool, but still you'll be able to migrate from your on-premise into Redshift as well. Now, very important thing to understand here is what is that you can migrate using this database migration service. Okay. Okay. If you are on-premise, okay, you can migrate it to AWS Cloud. AWS Cloud. The reverse also it allows you from AWS Cloud, you can migrate to on-premise. And if you have non-AWS cloud, non-AWS cloud, you can migrate from AWS into non-AWS or non-AWS into AWS. So you can migrate from on-premise into AWS. You can migrate from non-AWS cloud into AWS. Okay, it allows both, and it also allows you to migrate from the other way as well. But important thing is, okay, important thing is one of these, the source or target has to be your AWS cloud. Okay, so using database migration service, you can migrate from on-premise to cloud, which is from your data center to AWS, from cloud to on-premise, that is AWS to on-premise, okay, cloud to cloud. So if you have, let's say MySQL in Azure, you can migrate that into AWS, or you can from AWS, you can migrate into Azure. But important thing is one side, that is either the source or the target, has to be AWS cloud. That's the important thing. Okay. Now, this tool can be used for one-time migration and ongoing migrations. What is one-time migration and ongoing replication? Let's say you have applications that are running in AWS, sorry, on-premise, and you're migrating to AWS. Okay. And after migration, you cut this off, and then you go to AWS and start serving your users, business users from AWS. This is your one-time migration. On the other hand, let's say this is your on-premise and you don't have a DR today, and you want to use your on-premise for primary, okay, but you want to use AWS as a DR. Okay, so to make this happen, you replicate the data, and the data, once the data is in sync at both the sides, you continue to do the replication even after the sync is done. Okay, the reason is whatever the changes that are happening here, you want to ship the changes here. That's the reason you use ongoing replications. So use ongoing replications mainly for the DR purpose. Okay, one-time migration is when you want to migrate completely from your primary into AWS and do away with your primary, you use the one-time migrations. Okay, so we covered this. Homogeneous migrations and heterogeneous migrations. What are homogeneous migration? If you are migrating from same, if you do not change the platform, for example, if you have SQL in on-premise and target is also SQL, and it is, let's say this is SQL 2019 and this is also SQL 2019, or this is SQL 2012 and this is also SQL 2012. So you're not changing the version, you're not changing the platform. So that is homogeneous migration. On the other hand, let's say if you're SQL 2012, as part of migration, the target you make it 2012, you change the version, so it becomes an heterogeneous migration. Similarly, let's say you're right now running SQL 2012. Instead, you migrate that to MySQL, okay, MySQL 5.x. So you're changing the underlying platform. So these are called heterogeneous migrations. So if it is a homogeneous migration, you just use data migration service tool. However, if you are using heterogeneous migration, that is, you need to change from one platform to another platform or one version to another version. Along with the database migration tool, you must use another tool called schema conversion tool. Okay, so use both the tools for the migration. So homogeneous, just database migration. If it is heterogeneous, you have to use database migration service plus AWS schema conversion tool. They said the source could be any of these databases, the source could be on-premises, or you could have the database running on EC2 instance. Okay, important thing for people who are new to AWS, the database services in AWS are provided by what are known as RDS, Relational Database Services. And there are a number of database engines supported by RDS like MySQL, SQL, Oracle, MariaDB. Okay, these are the PostgreSQL or all the platforms that are supported by RDS. So from on-premise, you can migrate to this one of these database engines. That is one. On the other hand, let's say if your customer is already in AWS and he has installed database on an EC2 instance, if he has installed this on say MySQL, Now later he decides to use RDS, he can do so by using the database migration service. So you can migrate the MySQL running on ECS to your RDS MySQL engine. So it can be used to migrate on-premise and easy to instance databases as well. Okay. You can migrate from one RDS database instance to another database RDS instance. For example, if you are running an SQL RDS instance, you want to go to MySQL RDS instance, also it supports. Okay. And finally, you can migrate your Azure SQL database into AWS. So your Azure SQL database could be your source database. Now, what could be your target? Your target could be any of this again. Your target could be RDS database, or target could be on-premise. As I said, even your on-premise could be, you can migrate from AWS into on-premise. So your on-premise can also become a target. Okay, and your EC2 instance database can also become a target. And there are so many different targets that you can migrate your database to. Okay. Just remember that there's so many options available in AWS, like RDS, your DynamoDB, your Kinesis data streams, DocumentDB, so many different services, and you can migrate your data from your on-premise or any other cloud into AWS cloud. Important statement, very powerful statement. Migrate from any of the supported data sources to any of the supported data targets. That is, your data source could be anything here. Let's say if it is PostgreSQL, that is part of your Amazon RDS, you can migrate that Postgre into any of this. You can migrate it to Redshift, you can migrate it to Elasticsearch for Redis, or you can migrate to DynamoDB. You can migrate from any source to any of the supported data targets. Okay, but when you are doing from changing the platform, make sure that you are also using schema conversion tool. Otherwise, you'll not be able to migrate. Sorry. Now, this is a graphical view of how it is done. So in a database migration service, we use what is known as a replication instance. Okay, and you define the source endpoint and target endpoint. Source endpoint is your source database. Target endpoint is your target database. You specify the IP address, what is the platform that you're using, what is the version you're using, the user credentials for accessing, all that as part of the source endpoint, and similarly for the target endpoint. And then you migrate from source to destination. Important thing is that if you have a replication instance, you can have multiple replication tasks created, and each task performs migration from one source to another target. If you see here, this source endpoint, your another replication task, which is migrating it to another target. So here, if you see a single database, you can split that into multiple targets, 1 and target 2. Why do you need that? It is possible that in your on-premises, you might be running the databases for different applications on the same database. Now that AWS, you get an option to launch the services of your choice, and you don't have to pay the license fee, and it provides a pay-per-use model. Okay, you can split your database. You can, let's say if it is having a database for application 1 and application 2, you can configure a separate database for application 1, separate for application. So it allows you to divide your database into multiple databases, that is one to many. Similarly, if you have multiple databases, you can put all of them into single database. That is, it allows you to consolidate the databases. Okay, so these are some of the benefits of using database migration services, or the powerful features, I would say, of the database migration service. Where do you use? You can use a single source, multiple target, right? Where you divide your database, multiple source into single target, which helps you to achieve the database consolidation. You can also use it for the ongoing data replication or the continuous data replication, which is used for your DR application. Oh, any questions we have, Suvarna?
No, sir, no questions.
Are you guys following? Anyone has questions here? Feel free to type in. Otherwise, I would not even know if you're listening in or not. Having spent 1 hour, you should gain something from this class. Okay. Oh. So you migrated the database, now you migrate the applications. And we have a service called application migration service, which allows you to migrate both the physical servers and virtual servers. And it supports the Windows platform. You can migrate the Windows-based systems and also the Linux-based systems. Okay. And similarly, like your discovery, it has the agent-based migration and agentless migrations. And during the entire path of migration, your applications are online, okay, or online. The only during cutover, that is when you cut over from the source application to the target, that is when your application becomes unavailable for few minutes. Otherwise, your applications are online. So you try to do cutover during off-peak period, maybe over the weekend, right? In the evening, Saturday, midnight, 11 p.m. or 12 p.m. in the night. That is when you cut over.
Sorry to disturb you, sir. There is one question from Sanket. He is asking, how about the timeline to migrate XGB of data?
Migrate XGB.
Of data, yes.
Okay. Now, when you are talking about data, the data could be in the database, right? Now, it is not, data could be in the database, or the data could be outside of database. Is that possible? Outside of database? This is non-DB data. Like it could be in your file systems, EFS, NFS, or it could be in a NAS systems. So there's a lot of data that will be sitting in a non-database. As far as database migration is concerned, that is exclusively for migrating the data. When you say database migration, you're migrating the data that is sitting inside the database, right? That is one part. Second part is non-DB data. This is not migrated using database migration service. You have separate tools to do that, which is called data sync. And we are going to cover that in the few slides from now. Does it answer your question?
Sanket, please revert in the questions of chat if it answer your question. Yes, sir. He has replied. So there is one more question from Praveen. He's asking, what are the challenges we will face while migrating DB?
Very good question. We'll hold that and we'll answer that towards the end of the session. Okay. Because the challenges come across the different phases of migration. So what challenges we come across in assessment phase, planning phase, the application migration, database migration, data migration. You've encountered different types of challenges. We'll talk about that in detail. Any other questions?
So there is one more question. Yes, it's from Vishal. He's asking, does DMS support live migration? If yes, then how it handles write queries in peak time or working hours?
So that's what I said. It is applications are online during replication. Okay, and if you go back, same thing is with the database migration. That it is there is no downtime when you're migrating. Okay, now how does it does? See, you have source database, and here it maintains what is known as caching. Okay, and you have the replication group, replication data. Now, let's say when you say database, there are multiple tables. So it will migrate table by table. Let's say it is migrating table 1 and it is migrating, but this table is still online, right? And somebody is trying to write to this. Now, when the user is trying to write to this table, it actually writes to the cache space. Okay, it will write to the cache. So when it is migrating, he's migrating. And after this migration, the table is completed, right? Then it will migrate the delta or what are the updates that have happened from cache into target database. Okay, so your database is always online. It is not cut off. Does that answer your question? Who was that? Suvarna?
Yes, sir. Vishal was that. Yes, he has replied. Yes.
Okay. 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 Now, very important thing with application migration service is that when once you migrate the applications to the target, it is very essential you test your applications before cutover. So it gives you an opportunity to test the migrated applications before you cutover. You can check if everything, all the files are copied or not, okay? Whether all the services are running or not, whether the IP address that you have configured, right? The IP address is properly configured on this server or not. Can you reach this application using this IP address? Okay. So there are some well-defined checklist. Okay, there is a well-defined checklist that is tested as part of this testing prior to the cutover. One important constraint is that you may be aware that there are two types of virtualization: hardware virtualization and para virtualization. Now, application migration service will not allow you to migrate the VMs that are para virtualized. Okay, para virtualized. That is one. Second, if there are any VMs that are migrated into your VMware environment using P2V, even they cannot be migrated. Okay, so these are the two constraints you have with the migration service. Okay, now if you are using a migration service, when you initiate it, okay, there is no fee for using migration service if you complete your migration and cut over within 90 days. However, if you don't cut over within 90 days, then you will be charged on hourly basis. So if you are using application migration service, plan well in advance in such a way that you are completing your migration and cut over within 90 days. Okay, if you miss this timeline, then you start paying an hourly charge after 90 days. Okay. And then data sync service. Somebody was telling how would you migrate the data. Now this is a service that is used to migrate data from your on-premise into AWS. Not only this service you can use to migrate from on-premise, right? In on-premise you might have NFS servers, you might have the NAS storage, right? Or you might have some other storage sitting on SAN. You can migrate all this data into AWS. And there are a number of storage services in AWS, like you have EBS storage, you have EFS storage, you have NFS storage, then FSX for Windows, right? So many different storages, S3 storage. It allows you to migrate from on-premise to AWS. Not only that, it allows you to migrate from one AWS service, one storage service in AWS to other. For example, if you have EFS, this is say in account 1 and this is in account 2, it allows you to migrate from EFS to EFS within the AWS, or it will allow you can migrate from EFS to FSX. Okay. So it allows the migration between the storage services on AWS. It also allows migration from on-premise to AWS storage services. Okay. That's what data sync is. And let's look at the option. So it allows you to move between on-premise storage and the AWS storage, between the AWS storage services itself. Okay. Now, what are these edge locations? Now, in AWS, you might have heard about the edge locations, which are used. Edge locations are points of presence, and you can connect the. We are going to talk about the Snow family devices. You can connect the Snow family devices and use the edge locations to transfer your data into AWS. That's what these edge locations mean. We'll talk about that when we cover the Snow devices. Okay. Now, whenever you're doing data transfer, important thing is that you need to install an agent. So if you're migrating from on-premise to AWS, you have to install an agent, which is a data sync agent. If it is on-premise, you install the agent on your VM. Could be if you are VMware, you have VMware VM. If you have Hyper-V environment, you use the Hyper-V VM. Okay. If you are using the KVM, you install it on the KVM VM. Okay. You install your data sync agent on any of these. On the other hand, if you're migrating within the AWS storage service and you're migrating from one region to another region, and both of them belong to the same account, okay, you don't need an agent. You don't need an agent. On the other hand, if you're migrating from one account to another account, whether it is same region or different region does not matter. If you're migrating from one account to another account, then you need an agent. And where you install this agent? You install this agent on EC2 instance. Install this agent on EC2 instance. Okay. So that's what it is. So moving between on-premise storage, edge locations, other clouds, and storage. So you can also migrate from other cloud like Azure cloud into AWS. And when you are deploying within a okay. So one, transfer between AWS services in different accounts, that is when you use the data sync agent. And also if you're transferring onto S3, right, then also you need an EC2 agent. Okay, the self-managed file systems. What does it self-managed file systems? You can also configure an EFS, the NFS service on EC2 instance. If it is Windows, you can enable the file and print services. If it is Linux, you can enable NFS. That is what a self-managed file system. So if you're using the self-managed systems and you're transferring the files from that, okay, then you use data sync agent. So data sync agent you use if you're transferring across different accounts or if you're transferring from self-managed file systems in AWS. Okay. Very important thing is that it verifies the data integrity, because whatever you're copying from your source to target, you have to make sure the file integrity is maintained, right? That file is not corrupt during the process of migration. So it calculates the checksum of the file, the checksum of the data in the file. It also calculates the checksum for the metadata of file. And once the file is transferred to the target also it calculates the checksum of both the data and metadata and validates if it is same as the checksum in the source. Okay, so this way it ensures that the file integrity is maintained. Okay. And there are so many different services I mentioned, storage services, and data sync can be used to copy the data between these different storage services. Okay. I said if you are using the on-premise, depending on what you use, you can install on VMware, Microsoft Hyper-V, Linux, and if you are using different accounts, you install on the EC2 instance. This is a diagrammatic way of representing your on-premise. You have AWS storage services, and you're installing the agent. This agent talks to the data sync service. So there are two components here. Data sync is a service that is used for migrating data. However, if you want to migrate from on-premises, you install the agent here, and the agent communicates with data sync service and helps transferring the data to the AWS. On the other hand, if you are migrating within the same region, right, within the same account, where the same region or cross region does not matter. If it is the same account, then you don't need an agent. You have data sync service in one region talking to data sync service in another region of the same account. You don't need an agent. Okay? That is the difference trying to show you in this diagram. Now, use cases, obviously it is used for data migration. And if you have very old data, no, you are not putting, let's say you're not migrating your applications into AWS, but you have too much of data in your environment, very old data, and you want to store it in AWS. Or maybe you want to store in Glacier Deep Archive, which is a very cheap storage, okay, which is a very cheap storage, and you can comfortably save your data there. So it can be used for archiving the cold data. And data protection. So maybe you are having a on-premise data or one AWS region, and you are copying the data to another region. So basically, you're protecting your data in the event this region fails or your on-premise data center fails. You're putting a copy in the other region, data protection. And of course, as part of the data migration, as part of your migration into AWS cloud, you move the data into the cloud. Now, in this scenario, you are migrating data from on-premise to AWS, and connectivity has to be established. And today, the maximum bandwidth that you can get is 100 GB. And if you have exabytes of data, okay, it will take few years, even if you are using the 100 GB of bandwidth. Okay, now this is where the online data transfer may not be feasible. Okay, and this is where AWS gives you the option of Snow family. So when you have large data that cannot be transferred in a timely manner, then you use the Snow family of device. Not only that, there are many customer situations where customer does not have the internet connectivity, like your oil grills or oil wells deep inside the sea. They don't have internet connectivity and they want to transfer the data. Okay, then also AWS provides you the Snow family of devices. So okay, there are three types of devices that are provided by AWS. One is Snow Cone. If your data transfer size is very small, it is few terabytes, 8 terabytes to 14 terabytes, you use this. And if this is few terabytes to petabytes, so up to few petabytes, right, you use Snowball. And if it is very large, up to exabytes of data, hundreds of petabytes to exabytes of data, use Snowmobile. Okay. Now, what are they? They're nothing but the hardware devices. If you see Snow Cone, it looks like a hard disk, but it's a very ruggedized disk. Okay, and it can store up to 8 terabytes. So whenever you want to transfer it, you make a request to AWS, raise a request, provide your shipping address. AWS will ship to this address. You connect this data drive to your network, copy it, send it back to AWS, and AWS connects this device into the network and copy the data from here. In addition, if you are in Isle Grill and you have a corporate office close by and there is network connectivity, you can ship this device to your corporate office. And this device can be connected through corporate office using the edge network of AWS. Edge network of AWS. Data is copied from this device into S3. Okay. So this is where we talked about the edge locations, right? Using data sync. Now, these devices have data sync deployed by default. This is Snow Cone, and Snowball Edge is similar to that, except that it has higher capacity. It comes in two versions, 80 terabytes and 40 terabytes, and you can, depending on your requirement, you can do that. But if you're much more than 80 terabytes, you can use multiple devices in parallel and transfer it, and you can transfer few petabytes of data using Snowball Edge devices. And Snowmobile, this is amazing. This is a truck which is 45 foot long, and this is used for migrating when you have hundreds of petabytes of data to few exabytes. You use this device, and each truck can hold up to 100 petabytes of data. And if you have more than that, you bring multiple devices in parallel and transfer them. By having them in parallel, you can transfer few exabytes of data. Exabytes of data. Okay. So this is about the Snowmobile. Okay. So it is a secure truck, and however, remember, this is not available in all regions. It is available in select regions. Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty much from my side, wherein we have covered what is a data migration. What is a migration, AWS migration, and what are we discussed about the different steps that are required to migrate using the AWS migration approach. We reviewed the various tools that are provided by AWS to migrate your applications and data. So we discussed namely the migration hub, application discovery service for discovering the application and inventory, then application migration service for migrating web and app applications, database migration services for migrating databases, and data sync and Snowball services for migrating your data. So that covers all the services that AWS provides you to migrate your applications and data into AWS. I'll open this for the audience for the questions. Any questions?
There are no questions, sir.
So
the one question, earlier question is pending regarding the challenges.
Okay, one question and
Yes.
challenges.
What are the challenges we'll face while migrating DB? That is pending.
Okay. Now I'll just keeping my profile open. If you want to note down the number, you can note down. And if you have any questions later, also you can put your questions in the WhatsApp window. Not a problem. Now the challenges, if you really see, one thing is with respect to the let's talk about phase by phase, right? The application discovery phase. Now I said you can use agent based or agentless, right? If you use agent based, then you need access on all those servers, and there are many times the customer does not like to give access to your servers to install that. Now the challenge, if it is a huge environment, and if you have to manually discover that, right, it will throw you out of timelines, right? That is the risk you can see in application discovery. Similarly, this supports only Windows and Linux, but if you have some other platforms like Solaris or HP Unix or IBM, then you cannot use these tools for migration, right? And again, these platforms are not supported in AWS, correct? In AWS supports either x86 or ARM64 processor only. So if you have any other platform, then you cannot migrate all the workloads. So some of the workloads will remain in on-premises. So these are the problems. I'm quickly covering very at a high level. Okay. If you have any specific question, feel free to raise your hand. If you take the discovery process is that now as part of your migration itself, the application migration, if it is now the approach that you have seen is as is migration in the application migration. What if your application requires remediation? Your application software that is running is outdated, right? Then you are migrating it as it is. You're not transforming or remediating your application to the new platform. You're migrating it as it is. So you will have to make efforts later to remediate that application or transform that application. So in application migration does not transform when you migrate. That is one biggest issue. Okay. And as part of the database migration, now I shouldn't be saying this, but things are not so rosy as you speak. And if you are talking about the migrating from heterogeneous migration, particularly, you are saying that I can transform from MySQL to Oracle, right? If you are using a tool and you're migrating it, it may not work as simply as that, right? And it all depends on, again, the complexity of your database as well. There may be a manual intervention required for you, particularly when you're doing the schema conversion. Okay, schema conversion, you may have to manual intervention, and it may take longer time, and it may not be so simple as described here. That could be another challenge when it comes to database migration. Now, data migration, as you have seen, it all depends on the reliability of your link, and that keeps changing, right? And it may definitely take more time than what has been planned. So you need to account for that additional timelines for data migration. Okay, and for whether it's database migration or data migration, the link reliability is always an issue. And again, if you have the huge bandwidth, then definitely you must use a direct connect, not the VPN. And if you have to use direct link, you know the challenges associated with acquiring the direct link. First of all, the timelines, right? And there should be availability of the service uh, by the AWS partner in your area. Okay, so those are, and it will take, and there are usually take few months for you set up the direct connect. Okay, now this may not be the challenge of data migration, but it is a prerequisite for you to do the data migration. So these are some challenges that you can encounter when you do the migration. And all that we talked about these tools, but if you really, when you go into the field and start talking to the customer, you will have to talk to so many stakeholders to get the required data in case you can't use the agents for discovering your data. Okay, and communication is a very important aspect. Communication is a very important aspect when it comes to data migration. You must engage every stakeholder, from the business user to your business owner, the application owners, the infrastructure teams, security teams, server owners, right? There are so many stakeholders, and you have to get an agreement on the date that you're going to migrate. Getting an agreement from so many different people on a single day for migrating an application is a challenging thing again. Okay, unless it has the approval from the top management. Okay. So these are some of the challenges you face here. Who was that? Swarna?
Praveen. So he
Praveen,
has one more question.
go
He's
ahead.
asking, do we follow any checklist before final cutover?
Yes, definitely. There is a checkout. There is a checklist that is used for validating before you cut over. And the checklist is available online. You can go to AWS, what is that, cutover task. If you go there, you'll have the testing and cutover phase. It clearly lists out what are all the items that are validated.
Thanks, sir. There is one more question from Sanket. He's asking,
Mhm.
suppose data transfer task is stopped for any reason, will it
Hmm.
will it restart from start, or will you continue it from where it was stopped?
Good, very good question. And one good part with data sync agent is that it will start from where it failed. You don't have to start from the beginning. Okay. You're talking about transferring petabytes of data, and if network goes down, and if you have to do it all over again, you may not be able to complete that in your lifetime. So it does support you to resume where it was paused or where it was interrupted.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Please type in your questions if you have any questions.
Okay.
So there are no questions. So in
Okay.
that case, we can conclude the session.
Okay, so let me thank each one of you. Thanks Suvarna for giving this opportunity to come and present the session, and also thank all the participants for sparing 1 hour of their valuable time over the weekend and listening in patiently. And thank you very much, and hope to see you soon sometime later.
There are two more questions. I
Go
got
ahead.
it just now. It's from Praveen. He's asking, Cloud Endure is migration service.
Cloud Endure was a tool that was a tool that AWS acquired. Okay, and this Cloud Endure has been modified and is integrated with a service called Server Application Migration Service. Okay, so today, prior to Application Migration Service, there was a service called Server Migration Service. Now, what you see at the Server Migration Service has been deprecated. They have used Cloud Endure and come out with a new service called Application Migration Service. Okay, so your Application Migration Service leverages the Cloud Endure tool.
Thanks,
And
sir.
Cloud Endure tool is available as a standalone tool, still available, and it can be used.
Thank you. So there is one more question from Praveen. If data is about 5 to 10 TB, which service is preferable for migration?
Yeah, you should answer that question. 5 to 10 terabytes, which one you would use, Praveen? We have three, right? Snow cone, snowball edge, and we have snowmobile. Snowmobile is for exabytes. Snowball edge is from few terabytes to petabytes. And if it is only uh, hardly 10 terabytes, then you obviously use Snowcone. That is the cheapest service, right? Praveen, do you get that? Yes. And if you look at the cost wise, Snowcone is cheaper, and then then price wise, Snowball is slightly higher, and Snowmobile is the highest in terms of cost. Praveen, does it
Thanks,
answer
sir.
question? Okay.
Yes, he has replied yes. There's one more question. Can we use data sync agent for this?
Can we use that's what I told you. So the data sync agent is available on these devices, and if you want to connect these devices, you can transfer the data from this from these devices onto AWS using data sync agent. So data sync agent is already deployed on this device.
Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
So wherever there is a network connectivity, you can use it. You can use data sync to move the data. But if a network connectivity is not available, internet connectivity is not available, then you ship the device to AWS via courier, and they'll connect to the AWS network and transfer the data. Okay.
One
Any
more
other
question is there, sir. Yes. What is the timeline for hypercare mode?
What is the timeline for?
Hypercare mode.
I didn't get that. Hypercare mode.
Yes. It's from Praveen.
Praveen, can you? I didn't get that question. Can you type this in the chat window, Suvarna?
Yes, sure.
Please. Hypercare. What is hypercare? Praveen, where is this term coming from? I didn't get your question, Praveen. Sorry. Would you like to rephrase that? Okay. Suvarna, any other question?
No, sir. That's it.
Okay, fantastic.
Yes, we can conclude. Thank you, sir. It was really a great learning session, and I hope all our attendees have found it insightful. And thank you all for attending the session. We appreciate your being with us today. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.